Hello, and thank you for joining the Champion Within podcast, your premier go-to spot for unlocking your winning mindset. Whether you're an athlete looking to elevate your game to the next level, a coach leading the charge, an enthusiastic parent cheering from the sidelines, or an educator molding young minds, the Champion Within podcast episodes are packed with value, sharing the tools and strategies to unlock your potential and rise to new heights. Hosted by mentor, coach, and mindset leader Kate McCauley. Let's sit back and enjoy today's episode while discovering your champion within. And now, here's Kate.
Hey champions, thank you for hanging out with us today. You know that I am always on the search for some amazing guests here on the Champion Within, and I know that you're going to love today's guest. I need to read about Gabe Hall because he has so many amazing things. This bio that I'm going to share with you is probably not even covering all of the things that he's going to give you today, and I'm sure he'll tell me if I mess anything up here. As a former admissions officer at Vanderbilt University, he reviewed thousands of college applications. He's a college admissions expert and an essay writing coach. He's helped hundreds of students at this point get into top 50 schools. He knows what it takes to stand out. Gabe's also a former D1 athlete. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So he knows all about discipline and drive. And when he's not guiding future college stars, he's reffing NCAA Division I basketball games, working out, hanging with his wife or their two dogs, and maybe just going to some family gatherings. I did a little bit of stalking to see what he's up to. He's here to share with you what it takes to stand out. So I want to dive into this conversation. I know this is going to be for students, student athletes, and parents, and I'm excited to learn too. So how are you today, Gabe?
Doing well. First of all, Kate, thank you so much for having me on. And looking forward to give your audience any insight that I possibly can into, I guess my background, and hopefully that can inspire some others. But just any tidbits with the college admissions process for you, I would say traditional students or, student athletes and families who are still trying to navigate, I would say these new shark waters that is now collegiate athletics.
I just finished watching the Penn State press conference. I went to Penn State. And they were talking all about, NIL and all the shifting. It's a different space now than it was when I was in college, and I assume for you as well. Absolutely. Let's start back just a little bit. I really want to lean into the college admissions because that's what you're doing now and that's your expertise. I would love to jump back to your time as a student athlete. If you could tell us a little bit about that. I have some athletes that I work with that listen, their parents, coaches, and maybe connect it, if possible, to what you do now.
Absolutely. Well, I would say for me growing up, I had two very strict parents. I actually have 5 brothers. So I come from a very large family. And, I would say this academics always came first. If you didn't understand that, you understood it. You understood it pretty quickly when your sneakers were taken away and the coach was called and, you weren't allowed to go to practice. So academics always came first in our family. But believe it or not, and this goes into, I guess, my love for officiating college basketball. I loved basketball. Me and my brothers played it. I was definitely not the best in my family by any means, but I would say that, my drive started pretty early because I wasn't the best. I would do a little bit more, when we go to church gatherings and, let's say the church would go to theme parks. I would ask my mom and dad, if I cut the grass and do all these things, can I stay home and work out? For some reason, that was just instilled in me very young that, hey, if I want to be the best, I'm going to have to do whatever it takes, to reach that level. And we all know that nothing's guaranteed, right? But, if you don't put everything into it that you have, then obviously when you look back, there's going to be a lot of regrets that, will continue to haunt you every single day. So I can say from an early age, I always gave it everything. And does that guarantee success? Absolutely not. I failed a lot. Student athletes, I think that's one of the biggest things that we learn is that we learn how to fail, but fail forward because each day is sometimes a new failure, whether it's, it doesn't matter what sport you play, it's really about, the coaches tell you that you're the worst thing that ever was, right?
Right.
Yeah. You have to be able to adjust to that and still have that resilience and I would say self-confidence to say, hey, guess what? I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm going to prove myself right. So, from a young age, I was, always working as hard as I could. And, Eventually, I actually didn't play football until my junior year in high school. So
Wow. Okay.
2-year player, but I was always a really good athlete. I played basketball, so I was always very athletic. And I was obviously a bigger guy. So for me, translating over into football was pretty easy. The work ethic was there because my motto was always this: outwork them all. And
Love
obviously
that.
that motto has, translated into other areas of my life. But, I was fortunate enough to get a lot of Division I attention. Even in those 2 years, I played against a very great player, NFL All Pro, and Chris Long. His dad was NFL All Pro, Howie Long. And I would say that was kind of my claim to fame, and not to deter from Chris Long whatsoever, superstar at University of Virginia. But when I played against him in high school in the state championship game, that's when I really knew, okay, I definitely have what it takes to be a high level Division I athlete. And colleges began to take notice. Now, what I did was to continue to develop a little bit more. I actually went to a postgraduate school for 1 year called Fork Union Military Academy. And that's where I would say my work ethic, both academically and athletically, really, really took off in that 1 year. That's where my mind, body, and spirit just elevated to another level. And I definitely want to give credit to my parents because they definitely had instilled the values that allowed me to go through some very tough times at Fork Union, but obviously navigate the other side of that with, well over 18 Division I full football scholarship offers, and then being able to make the right choice, obviously, to attend Vanderbilt University, which, by the way, is right now the only top 20 football school in the country, ranked in the top 20, and only top 20 academic institution as well. I was blessed to actually get a full scholarship at Vanderbilt University, played all 4 years. I was actually at Vanderbilt, the first two-time winner of the Strength and Conditioning Award in Vanderbilt history, broke every single weight room record that you can possibly imagine. Bench press 225, over 40
Really cool.
pounds, well over a 500-pound bench press, 600-pound squat. And in my senior year, I was actually named a national strength and conditioning All-American, which, to me is still the most coveted honor of my college career. I actually was teammates with current Vanderbilt football coach Clark Lee.
Very cool.
Actually a senior when I was a freshman, but I remember even having a few conversations with Clark as a freshman. He was a very serious guy. He coaches that way still, obviously, at Vanderbilt. But, I always took tidbits from others to heart, good, bad, or other. And I always say this, any advice can be good advice depending on your perspective. So, there were a lot of lessons learned both on and off the field. But as a student athlete, I would say one of the biggest lessons I learned was to fail forward. We're going to fail. That's guaranteed, but how you deal with that is going to be absolutely everything. So, you're normally right on the verge of success, right when you want to quit, right?
Sure.
And, once you embrace that and you keep going with success, knowing that it's not guaranteed, you will even shock yourself with some of the results 100%.
Gabe, I'm obsessed with so much of what you just said. I was glancing down. If you notice, those who are listening to the audio, I was writing some things down because I didn't want to miss some of those things that you said. First, let me just give a huge shout out to your parents. It sounds like they were very instrumental in your success, helping you along the way. And I love that you were emphasizing student first. Student comes first in student athlete.
Absolutely.
This is something that not everybody understands, and it can hurt you in the long run if you don't get that from ninth grade on. I work with a lot of athletes at high school, college, and pro level, actually. If they don't get that, it's really detrimental. It's really amazing that your parents were there. And anyone who's listening right now, even if you don't have the support of your parents, pay attention to that part because it absolutely will change the course of your life. So many things. Let's go with fail forward, because I think that's something that I am always saying. I say that failure is research, and that if we don't lean into it, we're missing lessons learned there. And you mentioned something about every advice is good advice depending on your perspective. Do you have a story, maybe during your college career or even currently, where you felt like in reflection, you did fail forward?
Absolutely. And what I'll do is I'll give kind of a personal story of fail forward. And then what I can do is I can give a story kind of like in the college admissions landscape.
Perfect.
So I was kind of working with the student as well. When failing forward personally, we all have tough decisions to make, good, bad, or other. One of the toughest decisions that I had to make, I would say, even upon graduating from Vanderbilt, was there was an opportunity to become a strength and conditioning coach. Obviously, I already had the background, the accolades. I was a weight room warrior, right? And that wasn't the term I gave myself. That was a term that,
You earned that.
exactly.
Yeah.
There was a big strength and conditioning coaches convention that came to Nashville, Tennessee. That's where they held the annual convention where all the collegiate strength coaches would come. I had the opportunity to sit down with the Virginia Tech strength and conditioning coaches at the time. This is when, Virginia Tech football was a perennial top 15, 20 team. Every single year, Coach Frank Beamer was the coach. Well, anyway, my strength and conditioning coach at Vanderbilt was good friends with obviously the staff at Virginia Tech, and they had a graduate assistantship position that was opening up. And I sat down with the strength coaches. They interviewed me pretty much, and they offered me the position to become a graduate assistantship. They would pay for graduate school. I would, work in the strength and conditioning department. I would eventually get certified as a collegiate strength and conditioning coach, and then my career was going to take off. So at that point, I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to be the greatest strength and conditioning coach that ever lived, right? I'm going to live in the weight room. I'm going to train with the players.
Outwork them all.
Absolutely, right. They're going to love me. But one of the things that they wanted me to do immediately was make a decision. Like they had some other candidates that they were looking at, and I needed to make a decision pretty quickly because they wanted me to be part of the summer conditioning program. So I would have to, and this was really close to graduation.
Okay.
It was really close to May of 2008. So it was really close to graduation. So they wanted me to almost graduate and then come. But, for me, I still had some aspirations of playing professionally. So I had an agent at the time. I was doing workouts. We had our pro day at Vanderbilt, and there were opportunities to, work out for scouts for the Canadian Football League.
Okay.
And they were even asking me, are you still chasing this? Because, we need you to be all in. We take this pretty seriously. That was their livelihood. So for me, I had to make a choice literally that weekend, that, hey, am I going to accept this opportunity or am I going to continue to see what happens? And, I laid awake at night for a couple of days, definitely not all night. I don't want to sit here and, make a false story, but definitely I stayed up a little bit later than normal. And I remember working out by myself, and that's kind of my quiet place. I remember thinking, this is a big decision. I remember walking back I was still on campus. I remember walking back to my dorm, and, I said to myself, if I don't at least give this everything I have, like I have everything, I'm always going to wonder what if. And obviously I did not play professionally, but I remember I turned down the strength and conditioning graduate assistantship at Virginia Tech. And I immediately, literally, after I did it, I had this sick feeling like, what have you done? You just threw away an opportunity that you'll never get back. That I'll be honest, I was still chasing, obviously, worked out for a couple of CFL teams, et cetera. And, nothing came of it. I wrestled with that decision for probably 2 or 3 years. It was always in the back of my mind. It resurfaced and man, what were you thinking? But I remember, after a while, when things, started to normalize themselves, I remember looking back and, saying, you know what, while you thought you failed, you really didn't. All you did was make a tough decision, and tough decisions always have to be made. And as long as you have all the information that you need to make that decision, then there is no such thing as right or wrong. It's all in perspective. So while I thought I had failed, I guess it's more about perceived failure versus actual failure.
Right.
I thought I had failed. I thought I had failed. My family, wow, you gave me this crazy opportunity to do everything you've always wanted. But guess what? You were doing it on someone else's terms, not yours.
What a good point.
In reality, if I had have made that choice, I really believe that would have been a failure all in itself rather than a perceived failure at that time. You're going to have to make tough decisions. So, anyone in your audience, student athlete, traditional student, et cetera, you're going to have to make tough choices where to apply, where to focus all your time and energy in the recruitment process. You're also going to have to tell some schools no. You're going to have those tough conversations as well, right? So, those times are coming. If you stay true to who you are, you will always come on the right side of that decision, no matter if you think it now, but later on when you have time to think back, you'll always be on the right side of that. Now, when it comes to the admissions process, obviously, I've worked with a lot of students over the years, and I've seen students go to Stanford. I've helped them get into Harvard. Even Hannah Nichols, I'm allowed to say her name. I talk.
You have a long list. I did some stalking, actually.
Yes, absolutely. So I've helped students get into some of the top institutions in the country. I remember one particular student that I won't say their name without their permission, but I just remember they had to make a tough decision whether to, or which school to apply early decision to. There were probably some other schools based on their profile and just kind of their data points that they would have been better suited for. But for some reason, well, I'm not gonna say some reason, I know why, they were fixated on a particular institution that's definitely a top 10 based upon, I'll be honest, where their current boyfriend at the time was also
wow. Okay.
Early decision as well. Obviously, this decision was an emotional one, and we know when we make emotional decisions, they're normally wrong, right? So we should never. So, audience, please, adults, students, please don't make.
I'm going to jump in there because I'm curious. Do you have a tip that you use? I have some things that I tell the people I work with, but do you use anything personally, or for maybe that student or student athletes, people in general, to help you not make an emotional decision? Is there anything that you would suggest or that you do personally?
I always say this, and it's more of a thought process than anything. Always try to tell them, master your emotions or they will use you, period. Mm-hmm. And that takes time, right? Normally that first impulse is the wrong one, right? We have the impulse to react whether in anger or we, send that email too quickly or,
right.
Call and have that conversation or just act, right? Normally that first impulse is the wrong one. If we'll just take a step back and we'll really kind of self-reflect, right? That could be 5 seconds, it could be 10 minutes, it could be an hour. It really depends on the person, the situation. If you really take a step back and kind of just reflect, put it all out there, normally you'll see that first impulse would have been, oh my God, what was I thinking? You'll have that kind of like internal response. I always say this, be slow and right rather than fast and wrong. So be slow and right in your
I feel like we have so many pieces of golden wisdom that I'm going to have all these clips from this podcast. I love that. I didn't want to say before you spoke, but I could actually see your body when you said step back and reflect, where you almost take a breath. And simply taking a breath, and you also said you don't want to just respond or you don't want to react. You really want to respond with the right decision here. Sometimes, like you said, it could be 30 seconds, a few minutes. It could be, I put people on the 24-hour rule. Sometimes when you need to put yourself on the 24-hour rule with this, maybe it is like you were laying in bed thinking of all those things, the possibilities, the shoulds and supposed tos, the what ifs. But if you come back to your why, your purpose, what you feel, which is hard to do, then you can respond and not react. And I truly believe that we are exactly where we're meant to be every step of the way, every decision we make, whether or not it turns out in our favor or not. But thank you for sharing that. So continue with the story. She had this tough decision related to the boyfriend and an emotional decision.
Exactly. And she did ultimately, and I talked to parents about it as well. I let them know my honest thoughts. She's not better served here. But obviously we shouldn't be making an early decision, buying an agreement decision based upon where somebody else is going. This should be a well thought out decision. You fall down on your knees, number one, school for a variety of reasons. Financial aid is in play. There's a lot of reasons there why she shouldn't have chosen the school to be her early decision school, but she chose it anyway. And, to be honest, ultimately, she did not receive the outcome that she was hoping for. She was not accepted. And, then came that, oh my goodness, what was I thinking? Then comes that, if we're being honest, let's go ahead and use the word, the depression, right? And even the student athletes, I can say right now, we learn how to successfully manage depression because that happens almost on a daily basis in practice and games. You're not performing your best, and everyone's scared to, say that word, but it's a reality of the situation.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because it is something that we should talk about, and it is a reality.
Absolutely. And I lived it 100%. With this particular student, she had to navigate that depression. But I always say this, there is another side of suffering. There's that glory, there's that perspective, but obviously you have to be able to withstand, we talked through it. She knew she had made ultimately the wrong decision. But obviously, if we continue to dwell on that decision, then obviously all we do is we let the past affect our future. We picked up the pieces, and I didn't harp on it either, but I helped her pick up the pieces and we say, hey, you know what? There's still an early decision two strategy that we can use as well. And this time, you know what? She was all in. She understood kind of the magnitude of the decision she was making now would affect the next 30, 40 years of her life. And that's kind of the perspective I always try to help my students understand. What you do today really affects the next 30 to 40 years, right? So we have to get that high school mentality that, things are just going to work themselves out. I can make all these mistakes and, there's no consequences for them. But as we get a little bit older and the magnitude increases, we have to understand that, our decisions obviously are going to be weighted a little bit more heavily as well. So, she failed, right? And, but she didn't continue to fail. The pieces, we reevaluate, we look at their school list. She got into some other schools early action, but she had some schools she was chasing. So we reevaluated the strategy and we made them on sound judgment, not based on emotion, not based on who's going where, and she was really able to overcome. She's now able to help someone else. And I think that's the biggest lesson that we can learn from failure. There's always lessons that we can learn from everything. I failed, you failed, everyone has failed, whether they want to acknowledge it or not.
Right.
And if we can help someone else not make that same mistake or give them perspective as they're going through those tough times, then those failures are ultimately successes down the road. I always say this, fail your way to success, right? All the great ones do. She learned that, I'll say this the hard way the first time, but obviously as life continues to throw challenges her way, she is now battle tested and she will be able to withstand.
Hey coach, does any of this sound familiar? Your athletes are talented, but they lose focus when the pressure's on. Confidence swings up and down from game to game. Some play tight and second guess themselves. They struggle to reset after mistakes. Think about it. How many games or competitions have you lost, not because the other team was better, but because your athletes got in their own heads? Every coach has seen it. The missed free throw, the strikeout, the dropped pass, not from lack of skill, but from lack of mindset. That's why I created the Champion Within programs to bring tools that will help unlock peak performance for your athletes. It's also why I lead team workshops on visualization, breath work, and mental skills training to take these conversations off the podcast and bring it to your team. I do this in person and virtually. Imagine your athletes learning how to bounce back faster, handle pressure with confidence, and step into the game mentally sharp and ready. That's the difference mindset training makes. If you're ready to give your team that edge, let's talk. Go down to the show notes after this show and set up a call to see how I can help your athletes win from the inside out.
Yeah, I love that. So many valuable points to point out there. Speaking of that, when I did my stalking, I saw something come up on Facebook. And when I stalk you, it's not like hardcore. I'm not outside your house doing anything creepy, and my listeners know. But
Absolutely.
I take a deep dive and I read blogs, different things, some stuff on LinkedIn, Facebook. But something came up. You were spotlighted for helping students. And you had a quote in there that said, "I love seeing my students mature and progress throughout their process. The power of hope combined with a plan of action changes lives." I feel like that story that you just shared with us, I'm assuming that quote might not even have been about that student, but that's such a great way to talk about what you do. And so many people, I got to tell my listeners this, were commenting how you changed their life. If it was a parent, how you helped their student, which is so valuable to people. I have 3 children, one who's in college now, one who's a senior, and I have a freshman in high school. So I'm in that phase right now, and I know how stressful it can be for all of us, the parents, our kids, their friends. It's what everyone is talking about. How do you work with students? Let's dive into that now. How do they get in touch with you? Are you in person, online? Give us all the details. So everyone listening right now is like, where is Gabe in our life? We need him.
Great question. Well, I actually like to recruit a lot of my students from LinkedIn, but obviously, my website, I, promote that all the time. But I really meet with students and families virtually through Google Meets or Zoom, the traditional platforms, obviously. My LinkedIn page can easily be found, Gabriel Hall. Not too many Gabriel or Gabe Halls out there, which is a good thing, I guess, in my situation.
There is one former Philadelphia Eagle, actually.
Yes, I have. I've been told that all the time.
Right. But we'll make sure that we link your LinkedIn and your website so people aren't like, wait a minute, that Gabe.
Absolutely. So I founded, actually back during COVID, I actually founded my own consulting firm, C3 EDU Consulting. You can find me at c3educonsulting.org, or you can email me at gabriel.hall@c3educonsulting.org. I'm pretty easy to find, but I've been working with students throughout the college admissions process for almost 16 years, and for 13 years, I served as the director of college and career readiness for the Access College Foundation in the state of Virginia. I was responsible for a science and medicine academy with well over 50 STEM students each year, helping them apply to schools like Duke, Stanford, Johns Hopkins, Carnegie Mellon, UNC Chapel Hill. I mean, obviously the list goes on and on. Vanderbilt, right? Vanderbilt Commodore.
Of course.
So the list goes on and on. I'll say this, all these students that I've worked with and families, they've all added value to my life. I'm just honored and humbled to be able to just navigate them through the process. But I would say for any student or family out there, like I said, whether you're a student athlete trying to go the traditional route, through athletics, or I'll say non-traditional route through athletics, or the traditional route more through, kind of academically, et cetera, the first step is really identifying your school list. You really have to honestly understand, okay, you know what? Everyone's applying to Harvard, Yale, MIT, et cetera. Those are the dream schools, right? Most students will be attending schools outside of those top 5s, top 10s, top 15s. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Everyone thinks, if I don't get into MIT, somehow I failed. Well, there's about a 2 to 4% acceptance rate overall. And if you look at all these amazing companies, across the globe, everyone's not going to MIT or Stanford. Right. Not saying that these are not great institutions.
Not with a 2% acceptance rate. It's impossible.
Exactly. So really looking at the student's profile, looking at what they want to study, looking at what their, like I said, hopes are, aspirations. We really want to find a well-balanced school list. I like to put them in the categories.
How many would you say?
Well, I would say this, the landscape has drastically changed. I would say pre-COVID, the average student was applying from anywhere to about 5 to 8 schools. And I would say probably 3 to 4 of those were in state. And then it was your dream schools. There was a huge shift probably right around 2021 where that number began to drastically jump to about 12 to 13. Now the average student is applying to literally 20 plus schools. They're maxing out the number of schools on the Common App, which is 20. They're applying to the UC system. They're using the coalition application. They're applying to certain schools on their website. They're trying to maximize that list.
Is that because they want to say they got into all these places, or they truly love 20 schools?
It's honestly a little bit of both. And then what you want to do is you want to add that competitive nature in, because the issue has become is that the number of student applicants has increased drastically.
Right.
The number of seats at the institutions have not. So it's driving down the acceptance rates. That's a good problem for the institutions to have outright. But at the same time, it's not, because when it comes to those yield rates, they're all over the place, because it's not about how many they accept. It's about, are we filling our data points with how many students who ultimately decide to attend? That's what I believe is driving more institutions to offer early decision binding. Like we saw the University of Michigan went early decision this year.
Right.
We saw USC, just for the business school, has gone early decision. But we're going to see many more institutions, especially in the top 50, start to go more towards early decision, because a lot of final decisions are being driven by financial aid. So a lot of families are applying to as many schools as possible and trying to see who's going to give us the best financial aid packages. Exactly. In the end of the process. So unfortunately, if the same students that are applying to Harvard or Stanford are also applying to, let's say, Virginia Tech, Penn State, Lehigh University, then these schools have a tough job of who do we accept. So it's become ultra competitive. So I always tell my students, you're competing against the best of the best at every single school you're applying to. Those days of the top students only applying to the Ivies or top 20s. No, they're applying to top 100s because, hey, we're looking at matches and anchor schools and saying, okay, if I get a better financial aid package, this
Makes
is
more
where
sense to
I
them.
may go. Yeah, so it's become ultra competitive.
Yeah, that's interesting how that shift has happened. Do you think that COVID I know you said pre-COVID, do you think, I know the test scores and SATs and different things, how do you think COVID impacted that?
Great question. Parents became more in tune. Parents were at home and they became more involved in the process.
Okay.
A lot of schools also started to market themselves in a different manner online. They start to really hit the students where they are. A lot of the mail outs were gone, right?
All
And
right.
the students where they are. So there was just this big dynamic shift. And to be honest, it's only continuing to increase, especially now, obviously, with a lot of things going on with student loans, where we see now the aggregated limit for graduate school has been drastically lowered. Whereas I don't think there wasn't really an aggregated limit for the Parent Plus for graduate school. So now parents are having to make a lot of tough decisions. Hey, how do we get our student, how do we finance not only undergrad, but how do we personally finance med school or, et cetera? So it's becoming a very strategic process with how they're selecting schools. So a more robust school list has really become part of the process now. And like I said, that boom really hit after COVID when, a lot of students were online, a lot of parents are now still working from home. So they're more involved in the process. And, even though they're busy, like, hey, you know what, you need to be doing this, this, and this. So parents are more involved in the process now. So that's only made it more competitive as well. Because obviously, like I said, the number of applicants keep increasing, but the number of seats have stayed the same.
Sure. So many interesting things there. And do you think that it'll just continue this way? I mean, we do have this work from home, there's a hybrid shift, or just permanently working from home. What do you think is going to happen in the next couple of years? I've been reading some of your blogs and different things with test scores coming back. Some are still keeping them optional. And with parents being more involved, I'm going to be honest, my oldest, he had absolutely no clue, had no clue. And even my senior now, she's more of really a planner type kid than he was. And she really still didn't understand the process. So when the parents are more involved, I would guess, but you're the expert here, that it would continue to be 20 plus schools and these types of things. And with the shift of SATs and not SATs, all those types of things. What do you think, if you had to make a prediction, how will it continue?
This is the new normal. That's
okay.
This is now the new normal. It's kind of just like, with inflation, that eventually becomes the new normal and people begin to learn how to live and navigate kind of in that space. And that's just the unfortunate truth, because we're not going to see things go back. They're definitely not going to go back to the way they were. This is just going to be a normal part of the process. So really what students and families have to understand is, the process that your son or daughter went through 5 years ago, and you may say, you know what, well, my son or daughter got into this school or that school. Well, that was 5 years ago. I can't say it would or wouldn't definitively, obviously, but more than likely that same process wouldn't have the same effect holistically today, right? So I always tell students, each admission cycle is totally different. The same students that got into Harvard or Yale in the last admission cycle may not get into this cycle. So you have to treat each cycle as its own and really kind of understand, okay, you know what? Institutional priorities change every single year. We're seeing a lot of institutional priorities change right now just by a lot of mandates that have come down from the federal government. So the class of 2026 is actually, unfortunately going to be kind of the guinea pig to see how these changes are really going to affect admissions holistically. And then obviously seeing how things are going to either, drastically change, over the, I would say over the next 2 or 3 admission cycles going forward as well. So, this is kind of that change year where, obviously as, consultants and, other school admissions counselors, et cetera, we really get to see, okay, you know what, what is this new normal still shifting to look like? So you have to be prepared to be as competitive as you can. 100%. So you really can't leave a stone unturned. Any optional content in the application process has to be mandatory. And, and what high school students especially, Kate, have to do is they have to get out this high school mentality of doing things at the last minute. That is absolutely catastrophic.
Can you say that a little louder? Because
yes, high school,
true.
Yes, get out of this high school mentality of turning things in at the last minute. We have to eradicate that immediately. That's why even with my class of 2027s that I'm enrolling and working with now, we're actually starting to work on the college applications as early
I
as
was going to ask that. So is that
Absolutely.
typical juniors would come to start working with you, or is it sophomores when, you know?
Well, I work with, freshmen
Okay.
all the way to graduating seniors, but, with class of 2027s, or I would say any junior, any student that's entering junior year, that's your application year. Your application year does not start in fall of your senior year when you're just getting back to school. That's when the applications are becoming due, right? At that point, you're rushing through the process, right? You're really rushing through the process, and you're trying to, fill the gaps the best you can. That's not a strategy, right? I would say this: you really have to be early and intentful, right? You really want to be methodical in this process. Let's just say the minimum is going to be 12, and that's really what it should be. Anywhere from 12 to 20, then guess what? You really want to be methodical in the process. First of all, identify, okay, what gaps do I still have in my process outside of academics? What extracurriculars do I need to focus on both in and outside the classroom that can help strengthen my case? I always say this: your application is kind of like you being on trial, and the judge and jury is going to be the admissions officers reviewing the application. You have to make the strongest case possible to get the outcome that you are hoping for 100%. So, that process can't start in August and then hope for the best by November. Now, there are going to be students who start late for a variety of reasons, but, if someone's told you to start early and you decide not to, that's a personal choice, right? And we all have to make like I said earlier, tough decisions. So you really want to start as early as you can. And I can't speak enough about, certain parts of the process that, one of the biggest, I would say, parts of the process students neglect is really having that personal relationship with their school counselor. Now, that's a little bit harder for a lot of students. Most school counselors are completely overworked. They have way too many students. So, you're going to have to be very intentional there and, having a sit down. They need to know what your goals are. They need to know what schools you're applying to, right? Because counselors are going to be writing what's called a kind of like a recommendation letter, but it's going to be from a school-centric point of view. How does Gabe or how does Kate make my school better? Because when admissions officers reading that, okay, now I know how Kate's going to make my institution better, because
I love so many things. I'm sorry to jump in, but I need to.
Go ahead.
Well, first, I feel good as a mom because we were starting early. I was a teacher in high school for 20 years before I started my company. My mom's an educator. So just like your parents instilled that in student first, no matter what we were doing. My daughter, who's a senior now, we did a lot last year. We did all the visits, we did the things, and then she applied early. She actually got a message back from her guidance counselor over the summer saying, "Wow, Kylie, I can't believe that you're even saying to me, I just wanted to let you know I put your name down in the Common App." And, she sent all those emails to her coaches, just different people that she had to put down on those things. And they were like, "You're really on the ball." There were some people who were like, "Oh my gosh, what? You guys are doing this already last year?" And I was like, all right, I feel like we should be. So there was a mix of, I'll say, comments or things that maybe some people were thinking, are we behind, or kind of suggesting that we were a little crazy, to be honest, doing it that early. I'm glad we did, because she needed to feel the vibe on those campuses. Can I see myself here? And she's a student athlete 3 seasons. So life is busy during the school year. Why are we going to wait? So I'm feeling good about myself when you were talking about some of that. But I want to talk about the optional part that you mentioned and that extracurricular. I actually read a blog on your website. So everyone is listening now, you have a lot of great stuff on there that people should go and connect. And by the way, he did mention his email, his website. I will drop all of that in the show notes for my listeners. So you can just go right to the show notes, click on it. You don't even have to do all the stalking that I do. So that'll be down there. I want to throw that in and I forget to tell them. But you talked about the impact of meaningful extracurricular activities. You gave a lot of tips. You don't have to give the whole blog post to us now, but can you talk a little bit about that? And maybe also weave in that optional, because I, as a mom, was saying optional means do it.
Absolutely.
So, if you could touch, I know that's kind of 2 different things, but
absolutely. Well, first of all, start with the optional content. Optional means opportunity, 100%. So just like Duke, Duke has, they have a mandatory school supplemental, and then they have an optional school supplemental that you can choose to do. I tell my students all the time, if you're not going to do the optional content in the application, don't even apply, right? If I have to make a tough decision as an admissions officer, I'm looking at every single thing. I have to make tough decisions. I have, 43 spots left and I have 220 highly qualified applicants, and they're all reading the same academically, test scores, stellar letters of recommendation. How do I separate these amazing students that meet institutional priorities, right? I start to look for pieces of the puzzle, right? Who did the optional content, right? So, optional equals opportunity. Take it a step further. Get out of the high school mentality of doing the bare minimum that gets you by, right? This is a competition. And as a student athlete, we understand how to compete, right? Traditional students understand that most of you have competed in at least a science Olympiad or some sort of other academic competition. Treat the application process the same way. I need to be willing to do any and everything to help myself stand out. So whether it's an optional resume, it's an optional letter of recommendation, whether that's taking advantage of the additional information section, providing context, about a grade or something that, maybe an outlier in your application. Admissions officers value this information. It really helps us make those tough decisions with all the information available, but it also helps set you apart as a very mature student who's doing their due diligence and treating the application process with utmost respect. There's nothing greater that you can do in the application than make an admissions officer, or I'll say an institution in general, make them feel like you prioritize their school. They know that you're applying to other schools. They're not crazy, but when you make them feel like you have prioritized their application by doing the optional content, I can tell you right now, you will set yourself apart 100%.
That's a great tip for people. I think that carries over. That is who you're going to be at their institution. I work in the corporate space sometime as well. I'm told by leadership, I'm talking top leadership in a lot of these corporations, that incoming employees who are young often don't want to go the extra mile and do the extra thing. When you start building those habits as that high schooler, get out of that mentality of this will do, and move into I'm willing to go above and beyond. Just like you said earlier, Gabe, outwork them all. Right? If you're willing to do that, one, you stand out for this college admission process. Two, this is just who you're going to become. What you focus on becomes your reality. You'll be that person in college. And then when you go to get a job, you need those attributes. And if you don't have them, it's a problem in all kinds of spaces, not just the corporate space, but in all kinds of spaces. That's something that hopefully people who are listening tune into, rewind, and listen to again, because parents, you need to be a part of this. You need to be telling them. I know sometimes they're rolling their eyes at us, but you need to do that. I'm wondering, Gabe, is there a tip or two that you could give parents who are listening to help their students in any capacity during this admission process?
Agreed. And, it's really about striking that balance, parents. We don't want you to helicopter the process, because in admissions, we do value an independent student. So you standing over them, let's say, for example, if a student's meeting with me, I always tell parents, you decide to work with me for a reason. Let me guide them, but we need you to be the reinforcement behind closed doors, right? Making sure that you're still a part of the process, but that you're not doing the work for them, and, some students, I'm not gonna say they've been given free passes in high school, but teachers are, very forgiving. Hey, you turn this in late. No, that's not acceptable. Late means denials, right? You really have to make sure that, as a parent, that you're involved, but you're not overly engaged in the process, because we do want to instill that independence, but also these students need to learn how to own their own development. So they need to understand what that looks like, help them understand the magnitude of of the decisions that they're making. I would say this experience is the teacher, right? So, as long as you're having those mature conversations with them, helping them understand, hey, guess what? These next 12 months or 36 months, depending on, when you start working intently on your application process, can really shape those next 40 years, right? So, it's really about just having that perspective. But as a parent, as long as you're, staying engaged with them, and like I said, not becoming a helicopter in the process,
right,
you've really done all that you can do.
Right. So many good points there. Sometimes parents, we're figuring it out as we go.
Agreed.
I think that working with someone like you is really valuable for this process, because I'm just going to be honest, as that mindset coach, when I go in and work with a team or really anywhere, even if it's a corporate space, a different voice and an expert is really valuable, because especially a high schooler, I'm not going to say that my kids don't respect me. They do. I demand it, to be honest, but they definitely sometimes value someone else, even if I'm saying the same type of thing to them, when they can hear it from someone like you, Gabe, as an expert, it lands differently. It just does. So I think that you need to be willing to be supportive, don't be a helicopter, and let this process happen. And if you need that type of support, to reach out for it. When somebody is looking to work with you, what does that look like? So let's say it's a junior, maybe sophomore, who knows what year they are. Do they set up a free call with you? Do they go to your website? What do they do?
Absolutely. So to work with me, what I do with all my families and students, always set up a free consultation call, because you need to know who I am. I need to learn about you. I need to learn about your needs, and you need to understand how I can help. I love for the parent and student to be on the call. I never make a final determination on a family, and hopefully they don't make a final determination on me until I've engaged the student and parent together, because it's still going to be a family affair. I always tell my students, when you work with me, you become family, right?
Love
because
that.
I don't treat you any differently than I would treat my own family. And I personally invest in all my students. And, I can honestly say, students and families that I work with, they add value to my life. There's nothing more, I would say, energizing than, Gabe, I got in, right?
Yeah, I saw some of your testimonials. It's so many amazing things.
There's
there was actually text messages of people saying, "Oh, this happened," and I could feel it. I could feel that excitement that you have for them. And it was clear to me that it is an honor for you to guide them in this journey, because, as you said, this shapes the rest of their life, the next 40 years. Those who are thinking right now, maybe just go look at them and read them. When I went and looked at your website, I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And it was on LinkedIn. It was all over the place. It was evident that you truly care. I love that you also said they're like your family. As a teacher and the work I do now, doesn't matter if you're a kid, an adult, wherever we work with, when we collaborate as a partnership, I always say, well, if it's with kids, I used to say my kids, even if they weren't my three at home, my students became that. When I work with high school teams, they become a part of you. And same with you, I can tell. So that's really cool that happens. I love too that you said, I need to, of course, have the kid on the call. If I coach someone one-to-one, I work starting with teenagers and all the way through adulthood. But I tell a parent, they often will call me or send me a message, and I say, absolutely, I can explain more what this mindset stuff is. But is your child on board for this? I'm going to want to talk with them too, because this isn't a forced situation. I love that you have that component. It's important because it is their journey.
Absolutely, Kate. And they have to be willing to own their own development, right? Always do this. I like to drop the bucket right where it should be, right in front of you, right? Because if you're not a willing participant in your own development, all we're going to be doing is just kind of going back and forth, and and no family that invests in someone working with them, that wouldn't be doing them any justice as well. So the student really has to understand in the beginning that, hey, I need to be willing to own my own development to be able to maximize my opportunities in this particular situation.
As an educator and a mom, they say around age 12, you should start encouraging your child to talk to the coach, send the email, even if it's something that you have to help them. Well, how do I even write this? And then encourage them. My ninth grader, if there's an issue with something, whatever, he gets points off for his homework, something, I say, they use a system called Canvas, and I'll say, you need to go on Canvas and message your teacher. And I say, you can ask for my opinion. What do I need to say? He'll often say, do I sign from Ryan for this? And I say, yeah, you need to address them. You need to sign it, just those little pieces. And even though it's in his ninth grade verbiage, it's important to start doing that. And then when they get to these bigger decisions, this isn't something that is brand new. You have to have them advocate for themselves, take ownership and accountability. And I think it's more rewarding. You can tell me when they reach out to you and send those messages. I loved reading the testimonials and like little screenshots of the text messages. Do you find that the kids who are leaning in and advocating for themselves, going all in, of course, with parent support, they have more
Absolutely.
gratitude, I guess.
Absolutely. Because they know at that point it's their hard work being realized, right? And then they know that, I guess, and then it creates that confidence, like I can, because you're going to be tested in the process, right? You're not going to get into every single school you apply to, right? Let's go ahead and say that right now, right? There is guaranteed disappointment waiting for you. I don't want to, paint a picture that isn't realistic, but to be able to withstand that and be able to understand that, my right fit is going to come. And when that letter comes in from those institutions, and you know that all the blood, sweat, and tears that you put into that application process, the activity descriptions that I had you do over and over and over until, right? That, the essays that we just, oh my goodness, Gabe, again, yes, again, because we need to work on this particular passage or that passage. You understand the effort that it took to get here. No one gave it to you. This is the one point in time where, teachers can't save you, parents can't save you, counselors can't save you, right? It's really on you. And yes, you'll have a shepherd in me or someone else, right? But at the end of the day, it's you, right? You get yourself in, no one else. When they get those letters, they know that they can, right? And when you start to believe that you can, and I always say this, there's hope for the future, there's power in the present, right? So you create that hope for the future, and then you begin to manifest it in real time in your actions and everything you do.
I love all of that. So powerful. So many amazing things that you can learn during the process and just get refined and get better. And plus, when you start to do that, your brain, I'm all about the neuroscience and changing the brain with mindset. Your brain has been there before, and you start to use this in other areas of your life through your college career and beyond. And when you start doing that, you literally change the neural pathways in your brain, that you're more confident, that you think, I can do these things. I've done this before. I've worked with Gabe and different people who have said, given feedback. That's something that I find in so many spaces. People say to me, as leaders, they cannot receive this feedback. They don't know how to take this feedback and move on from it. There's so much growth that happens when working with you. I just love it. We could probably talk about so many different things. I know you're a busy guy, so I won't keep you forever. We're going to go to our last question, which is, the title of the podcast is The Champion Within. If you were the main character in a movie called The Champion Within, the audience is sitting there watching and we're at a cliffhanger moment. The screen cuts off, just goes to black. They all start freaking out. What are they hoping happens next for you in your journey?
Wow. When I think about that question, I would say, if everything went black, they'd probably be screaming, don't doubt your strength. You've been working for the life that you want for a long time. There's going to be challenges. Don't quit. Step into the unknown and know that you have what it takes. Fear is going to be the price that you pay for stepping into your glory, right? We're all
love that.
Change, but they're screaming, Gabe, step into that because we can see what comes next, right? You may not see it yet, but if you step into the unknown and you believe that in the foundation that you've built, you cannot fail. You can't. It'll be trials and tribulations, but you can't fail. So I believe that they're screaming for me to keep going, keep pressing forward, keep crawling towards the life that you want for yourself, for your family, for your students. Honestly, believe, right? Sometimes I'll never forget what my coach at Fork Union used to always say. He was just like, Gabe, sometimes you just got to believe. You just got to believe. All obstacles, everything's failing. Nothing seems like it's going your way. You just have to believe and keep going and keep trusting that the process is going to continue to work out in your favor, even when no one else believes it. Even you can't see it.
Right. I love that you said all that, because that you're going to have some people who are saying to you, who do you think you are? That's not good. But if you can believe it, even if you can't see it in every specific little detail, you have to have that intrinsic belief that it's possible. I love that answer. Thank you so much for that. Gabe, thank you again for hanging out with us. And my listeners, make sure that you go down, click on those notes, follow him, LinkedIn, all the different places.
Love to hear from you.
What's that?
I was letting them know I would love to hear from them 100%.
Awesome. I really hope they do reach out, and I'll be hyping you in all the places. I become the hype woman after our podcast. So I really hope that they do reach out, because it's valuable to have your guidance. Well, thank you so much, Gabe. And for those who are hanging out with us today, I appreciate it. Go crush your week ahead.
Thank you for hanging out with Kate today. And whether you're going to coach, teach, cheer from the sidelines, or hitting the field yourself, remember, mindset is everything. Don't forget to follow the show for the latest episodes, as we all need a little extra motivation, humor, and sanity in our busy lives. Now, go and unleash your champion within you, one step at a time. We're always rooting for you.